Right, good afternoon and welcome to the Vermont Legislature's House Committee on Environment and Energy. This afternoon, we're going to hear from the Agency of Natural Resources on their areas in the Budget Adjustment Act. And committee, what we need to do is just understand the proposals, ask questions. Where's the money coming from? What are we, why? Then we'll hear from our budget liaisons after we hear from witnesses, discuss whether or not we feel like we have questions or concerns we want to pass on to appropriations, or we supported it and want to let them know. So we need to respond to Appropriations Committee. With that, I will welcome Commissioner Beeling. Welcome.
Record, my name is John Beeling. I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Environmental Conservation. The Budget Adjustment Act provision that we're here to discuss today has to do with our ongoing response to PFAS. I think the committee is familiar with what PFAS are. It's a series of chemical compounds which are persistent in the environment. They're called forever chemicals because they really don't break down naturally. They have a number of health effects. Vermont has really been wrestling with PFAS and responding to PFAS since 2016, when it was discovered in widespread in Bennington, Vermont. Since then, we've taken a lot of actions to respond to its presence in our environment. One area that we have not got to yet, and that we're getting to now, is in private wells. It was part of the Bennington response of the city or the town to find out where it was located, but we have not undertaken a more robust effort to find out the prevalence or the persistence of the substance in private wells. Private wells are a substantial portion of how Vermonters get their drinking water. We have taken a close look at public drinking water supplies, have a very good handle on its presence there. And at present, I believe there's about 20 public drinking water supplies that have ongoing treatment for PFAS. This was obviously something we were going to get to. We needed to do this kind of incrementally. We looked at it in schools, we looked at it in public drinking water. What has led us to where we are now, the timing is really related to a lawsuit. I think most of you are familiar with the fact that the state has sued 3M and DuPont in a products liability case over PFAS, basically a failure to warn case. And so in that case, we are in the midst of discovery. The case is presently scheduled for trial in 2025. We need to develop expert testimony on the presence of PFAS in the environment in Vermont. And one of the data gaps, both from a regulatory perspective and a legal perspective, is this private well sector. So the experts that we're working with on the outside said that we need a minimum of 500 private well samples in order to do some modeling so that they can present testimony saying, it's present in pick a number 10, 15, 20%, but they need a good faith basis to do that. And statistically, they've told us 500 is the number for Vermont. We need to get going on that. I believe on Friday, 700 letters went out to Vermonters seeking volunteers to have their wells tested. So we're getting this going, and we're going to need to respond as soon as we get the results back, which is why we didn't have this in the original budget from last year. We kind of moved this way because of the litigation. We need to do it anyway. It's not because of the case. We need to do this anyway. But timing-wise, that's kind of why we're here now. We've done some calculations. This money, the $3 million, you probably overall budget, we're seeking an additional $9 million for this effort. But this initial money really relates to what we expect we'll need for installation of what's called point of entry treatment systems. This is the common way to address PFAS contamination in a household. It's what we did in Bennington. If there are water lines near a house, that's frankly a better solution. That's what we did in Bennington. If someone was near a water line, we connect them. But a lot of Vermonters are not near water lines, and it would be very expensive to do so. So we're expecting that we're going to need to install these POET systems in a number of homes.
Representative Sibilia has a question.
Briefly, why is it better to connect them to the public water than the?
So the one of the aspects of POET systems is that they require a lot of what's called operation and maintenance. You need to change out the filters once a year, right? So the initial installation of the system is only around $3,500. The cost of operating and maintaining that system is around $2,500 per year. So it's substantial. It's not cheap. It's very expensive to get rid of the filters.
What did you say?
So, but these dollars are really, we're looking towards, and we've just done some calculations. We based our estimates. We use the number of 15%, which is probably conservative, but it could be higher. But that's based upon our experience with public drinking water. So we're thinking we're going to go out, we're going to test 500 wells. We're going to get 15% of those are going to be above standards, which is 20 parts per trillion for 5 compounds combined. So it's a pretty low number. It's not hard to exceed that number. The other aspect of this is once we find it, this is kind of where the litigation ends and the regulation begins. Is we've got to address it, and then the way we work, the way Matt Chapman's shop works, is we find contamination. We don't just stop because we have to assume that there's probably more contamination in that area. So we will go and we'll start looking, in the vicinity of the home where we found the PFAS, and we won't stop until we don't find any hits. So it's going to grow, right? The 15%, if it was just one and done, we could say, fine, but we can't do that. We need to regulate. So this is just going to be the start of a process. And so that's really where the 9 million is heading. We're going to need to do further investigation. We're going to need to do installation. If we do run into a situation where we can identify a responsible party, if we're near a facility that is a producer of PFAS, we always try to see that the responsible party pays. That's baked into how we work. That you can't really depend on that with PFAS. PFAS is not like a lot of different chemicals that we deal with. If you've got a petroleum contamination situation, you can usually figure out where it came from. Solvents, you can usually track it back to a place and find someone who's responsible, and hopefully they have money and they'll pay for it. But PFAS is so ubiquitous and so persistent in the environment, it's not that common. Saint-Gobain to me is fairly exceptional. It's that we could look at a plant, we did modeling, we did all kinds of work, we figured out what happened. It was basically aerial deposition from the stacks. It wasn't the classic, there's a spill over here, it got in the groundwater, it moved over. It came from the air, right? And so, but we can't depend on that being the case when we find PFAS today. It just isn't current. So we need, as a state, to be ready to respond. We can't just sample someone's well and say, you're above the standards, you're on your own. We feel like they're volunteering, they're helping us fill data gaps. It's up to us to help them out.
And so there's 9 million more for the same program.
Yes.
Because you expect it to kind of potentially.
It'll keep growing. This is really for the initial effort and then maybe some going forward, but then this is the beginning. Massachusetts has been doing this. New Hampshire's been doing this.
There were some Midwestern states that found a fair amount, as I recall. When we were in, okay, so we're not alone. Other states are on the same path.
Yeah.
Representative Sibilia and then Clifford.
I have 2 questions, Madam Chair. The first is if there's a plan with the AA on the $2,500 annual maintenance. Is your plan to pay for that for where we find it for how many years?
Right. So we are still refining that, but we do have a plan. That 9 million, the capital cost, we feel that we can cover the capital costs in some period of operation and maintenance. We're going to refine that before we go forward with our presentation on the 9 million. There's a lot of variables here, right? But yes, our expectation is we will cover some portion of O&M. The other point I'd make is that we believe we have a very strong case, and that's going to be part of this case. If we win this case, so just so folks know, New Hampshire and Massachusetts, they pay for installation only. And the only way there's O&M covered is from recoveries from responsible parties. We're trying to go further than that and try to come up with a plan to help folks out. It may be income-based. That's one potential. That's very challenging because unlike programs like Healthy Homes, where it's a one-time demonstration, if you're going forward for a period of years, you would need to re-verify every year. It's not a small undertaking to processing these kinds of claims year in, year out. Ideally, we get money from 3M DuPont. This basically a trust fund is established, and that takes care of the O&M. That's the best outcome we could hope for, but we can't count on that. But so we need to be ready to help folks out for that part of this process.
Second question, thank you. My second question is around the letters that were sent out to the 700 homes. Was that part of a bill that we passed last year? Was that part of an existing program? How is that? What is that connected to? What funding or appropriation is that connected to?
So that's actually connected to the litigation. So we worked with the law firms, and the firms are paying, they're forwarding some of the monies, towards the lawsuit. So they're actually paying for the sample.
Okay.
So they're going to pay for the sample. That'll be part of their recovery. But then once we get the results back, it's us. It's not just a litigation expense.
Okay, Clifford and then Pat.
Actually, Representative Sebelia's first question was going to be mine. So.
All right, Representative Pat.
On the same subject, when you first mentioned this, I'm just wondering, who are these people? Where did this list come from again?
So we work closely with the experts, and so it's a statewide program. And we work very hard at trying to make sure we got a good comprehensive picture. You could bias these things, right? If you go only in areas where we know that there's PFAS contamination, it would be biased and it would be challenged in court. Right. So you need to be very comprehensive. So it's a very broad swath that we're looking at throughout the entire state.
Okay, so it's not based on any particular characteristic of the people, like they had a concern about PFAS. Okay.
No, because if we did that, then we'd come back with very high level. We'd say, "Oh, there's 90%." They say, "Yeah, you cherry picked, right?" So you need to be, fair, frankly, and take a look, in very rural spots. And if you're finding it there, then we know how widespread it is.
Thank you,
Representative Stebbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi. So. Can I understand that the letters were paid for by the legal firm, but I guess my question is, what happens if this isn't approved? I mean, if like the BAA, because it kind of sounds like the administration has chosen to do this without having the BAA actually go through the legislative process.
Right. I mean, we need to do this. We need these samples. We're not required by law to give funding to folks who have contamination. We believe it's the most appropriate and fair use. It's a public health issue. So, but even if this isn't approved, we need this data. If we're going to get substantial recovery, we need to know how much contamination there are in private wells in Vermont.
I have. Is that okay?
Yep.
I guess maybe the letters could have been sent out like next week, just in fairness to the conversation and the due process. But I do want to say, I do understand the goal, and I do appreciate going at the producers and trying to actually get the funding to support Vermonters and to support this effort. I do appreciate that. I guess I'm a little worried about the consistency of approach because, to your point, PFAS is so ubiquitous. So are PCBs. And there's been a lot of conversation about, as we start to see test results come from various schools, does the agency administration have a plan for having a consistent approach? Because in my experience working with Forever Chemicals, 4 jobs ago, it never stops. The bill just keeps coming. And to your point, the 9 million is a start. I guess without a plan, I worry that, we're doing this for PFAS for this lawsuit, but then over here for PCBs, we have a different, or perhaps a different MO that we're operating by. And I'm wondering if there's a strategy and a plan for how to deal with that potential ceilingless price tag.
So, each situation is a little bit different. I mean, PCBs, we are trying to help schools. So we are consistent insofar as we don't, we're trying to be consistent in terms of being fair. This is a little different animal because excuse me, no one has an obligation to let us test their wells. Right? The law requires us to test every school in Vermont, and we have to do that. So there's no negotiation that we're required, the legislature requires us to do something. This is voluntary. This is someone coming forward and saying, yep, I'm ready to go. And it was our strong belief that in fairness, if someone's going to do that for us, we ought to help them out. And so this, not every situation presents the same facts. This is a little different than the PCB issue.
Understood. And I guess going still to like, is there a strategy or a plan for the sky's the limit with, forever chemicals, and what the potential price tag could be?
So the potential price tag is very difficult to predict. I mean, we've done our best. We've based it upon the data that exists out there. I would guess the overall plan that the best case scenario is we win a giant judgment. And a lot of the sort of like Saint-Gobain writ large. I mean, Saint-Gobain paid for water lines, they paid for POET systems, they paid for the operation and maintenance of the POET system. So we have a model, right? And now we have the companies that are frankly more responsible for this than Saint-Gobain was, right? They knew. If you read the complaint, watch the movie Dark Waters. If you want to get like a background of what's happened here, it's criminal, frankly. So that's part of the overall plan. We recognize there's a risk there. And as a state, we might have some hard choices to make down the road if we don't get that big judgment. But we're trying to move forward. And as we find public health threats, address them as fairly and as equitably as possible.
So can you help us understand where the money's coming from? It says general fund to contingency fund, but why do you have that 3 million in your budget?
My understanding is it's a budget surplus. I don't know, but I mean, that's what I understand.
Do you want to add something, Director? Or I couldn't tell.
So for the record, Matt Chapman, Director.
Active listening.
Sure, I'm Director of the Waste Management Prevention. So there's a budget surplus, and part of the proposal is to use a portion of that to help basically defray the cost of Vermonters if they have PFAS located in there.
To be clear, it's an overall budget surplus, not the A&R budget.
It is not an A&R budget.
Yeah, it's like
Correct.
we don't have budget surpluses
It's
in
not A&R.
A&R. So thank you. That helps. Representative Stedman.
Thank you. Does that mean, well, actually, are there vacancies right now at A&R? Like if we actually had all positions filled, if there are no vacancies, would that 3 million perhaps need to go to like pay for staff to continue ongoing work that maybe we're not able to do right now?
We had one RIF in the budget. That's the only position that I'm aware of that we have cut.
I
Other
can
than,
answer that.
yeah,
For the record, Maggie Gendron, Deputy Secretary for ANR. The agency does not have any vacant positions. At zero. All of our vacant positions are out for recruitment right now.
Or what?
Out for recruitment.
And can I ask how long they've been out for? Like, I'm trying to get a sense of like, yes.
December of 2023, December of 2022, and the beginning of January 2023 was when the last position went out for recruitment.
One more question.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm only asking because in last year when I was on the transportation committee, we went with something that, 3 months later, we were like, oh, we shouldn't have done that because we really needed the money. That's why I'm probing so much, just to give some background. If when we fill out all those vacancies, is there a chance we're going to need this 3 million to actually like keep in line with our budget for the next year, having not looked at the next budget?
and we believe this is the best use of this money at this time. That we're getting into this. This is going to start happening. This could start happening by next month. And so it's our belief that this is the best use of these funds at this time.
Also, this isn't A&R budget surplus. Wasn't going to them. Representative Smith.
Thank you. If you were to test my well and found it high of PFAS, you're gonna take care of the problem and remove it from the well. is there gonna be a repercussion to the homeowner? Is it something that's gonna be a black mark on a deed or on some sort of an information system? Where if 10 years down the road, I want to sell my home,
Right.
and someone looks at this and says, oh, Jesus, this was tested high. I don't want this house.
So I used to be a lawyer, so I'll try to put that hat on. I believe a homeowner does have a duty to disclose whether or not this is the type of thing that would fall within something that you would need to disclose when you're selling your property.
Will these owners that are volunteering be told that, do you think?
I certainly will tell them, we would certainly tell them that if they were to ask. This came up in.
If they were to ask?
Yes.
Boy, they should probably know that, I think.
Well,
I would be afraid to have that done to my home if you found it and you did eradicate the problem. But down the road, somebody's gonna,
that's fair. And I think, when we do these things, there are comprehensive discussions with homeowners about what, that would be one thing. There's a lot of questions that people have. They want to know how long, how much it costs. There's a lot of questions, a lot of dialogue that takes place when you start doing these types of things. And I think that's a fair question for someone to ask.
will these lists be available to the public as to who you're gonna be asking to volunteer?
Good question. I don't
They're
think so.
They're public information.
Yeah, that is public. I mean, I wasn't sure if there was a litigation, but no, I mean, once we start treating it as regulation, it's public.
Thank you.
That made me think of a question, and then I know you had your hand up. Does a well ever recover from a PFAS contamination?
So, yes, so there is, notwithstanding the fact we call these forever chemicals, there is sort of natural degradation and sort of flushing that happens of the groundwater over time. It really is a question, and this is the importance of sort of the follow-on investigation after we find, it's like, is there a source somewhere nearby that is causing the groundwater to be contaminated? How can we basically find and eliminate that source so the groundwater will clean up quicker than it currently is? I think it's probably also important to just put a pin in. We say that PFAS is everywhere and it has ubiquitous uses in commercial applications. But when we went out and tested all public drinking water systems, we found it in somewhere less than 15% of those systems. So, I mean, I think there's we all say it's somewhat loose, but I think that people should appreciate that the impacts are ubiquitous. We get lots of exposure from a lot of different directions, but I don't think you can say that it's everywhere all the time.
That's a really important point. Thank you for that. Representative Tory.
Thank you. I was just wondering, you mentioned the $9 million. Is the 3 million going into that 9 million or is it on top?
It's independent. So 3 million, the 3 million is really for this initial effort. And then the 9 million is as we extend it. We expect as you find it here, you're going to find more. This is really kind of our first.
Representative Sapkowitz, then Sibilia.
So we just heard that that the source is kind of varying places, and that in certain cases, at least, the PFAS can move along and we can get reduced levels over time. Is there a spot where it's a sink where it stops and doesn't go anyplace in the environment, or is it just sort of constantly moving around from one location to another?
So, I mean, it's in the groundwater. So it really depends on the nature of the aquifer you're dealing with, what the geology is, what the flow patterns are. So every particular location is going to be somewhat different. If you're near, surface water, it might migrate that way. If you're in a fairly isolated zone, with clay, it may not move very much. So it's highly variable in the environment. Just there is evidence that it can basically migrate and move. It's not going to degrade, but the levels will reduce. So it's really variable from site to site.
Representative Sibilia.
Yeah. Any connecting being done to or envisioned to prioritization and public water systems funding or project?
So at this point, we have a good handle on the public water system. So all of them, we've just dealt with the public water supplies. I can show you the.
No, that's not what I'm asking. I think I'm not asking the question well. So I'm envisioning that you're finding, a series of these, maybe someplace where there isn't public water.
Right.
And so is there any connection or thinking
I see.
at this point about
Right.
the need to prioritize public water systems or extension of public water systems in those areas? Have you all started talking about that?
That certainly is going to be something, if we start finding it in areas where there is a public water supply, yes, that's something that we would look at very closely. That's what happened in Bennington.
And if there is not a public water supply?
And you've got a poet, and then you've got the poet system. If you can't hook up to public water, you really have three options. You can install a poet system, which has its downsides, as we discussed. You can hook up to public water if it exists, or you could look into drilling another well. It is sometimes possible to put in a replacement well, which if you've got, if you have a shallow aquifer and a deep aquifer, it's possible that the deep aquifer is not contaminated. That's not really favored for a lot of technical reasons. It is sometimes possible. That's really the only other response to.
Okay, I guess what I don't know about PFAS contamination in the state is pretty significant. But so I'm guessing that we're going to find, groups of these. And I'm thinking about the need for new public water systems. Perhaps there isn't a public water system. And so this is probably pretty early, although also pretty late. If you think about it. I'm just wondering or suggesting or hoping that at some point we will connect prioritization of new public water systems incentives to those types of goals.
Yeah. I think that's a good suggestion.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
All right. Oh, Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So history of PFAS, when was it, when did the state of Vermont first want to deal with PFAS, or how long has it been an issue?
So it's been around since the 1950s.
Okay.
The evidence of its health effects really started in the 2000s, 2010s, that time frame. Vermont first became aware of its problem because Hoosick Falls across the border in New York had a significant problem.
Right.
We started looking at Bennington. Frankly, did a much better job than New York did, and really kind of a poster child for how you do this. And so since then, we've really been working at this, and I think this is the logical next step. This is human health, right? This is more important than anything. So we really need to do this.
So thank you for that. I am wondering though, finished with this request, but isn't there something, I can't find it right in front of me, but there's a request for brownfields money to be moved also.
That's not through the BAA. That's not a budget adjustment request. That is, I believe, through the that's through the big bill. Or it could be through the ACCP. It might not be in our request.
Yeah, I know. That's why I kind of wanted to talk to you about it while you were.
Back up, I think.
That's coming tomorrow on other things, but for BAA, we have, it is ACCP, but it is brownfields. And I guess I wanted to understand the relationship with the two programs and how I'm going to ask them if it's going to be subject to your process, and I'd like to know that answer.
So my understanding is Matt is going to be at that hearing as well. So
okay, at 3:00.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's going to help
us.
The nexus between us and ACCD with the brownfields.
Okay, great.
Make sure he knows that question is downstairs now, but
okay,
back up at 3.
Great, thank you. Representative Stebbins.
That's what I'm sure. I'm just looking up the Environmental Contingency Fund. Can you let us know, how is the health of this fund, and where does it get its money? And to your point, if 9 million is the start, what the fund looks like after this round? understanding your caveat of like, you're hoping to win this case.
Yeah, so it's no secret that the ECF has significant strains on it and will for the foreseeable future between PFAS, PCBs, and then your run-of-the-mill hazardous waste sites. It's the principal source of funding for the ECF is a tax on hazardous waste disposal. It also gets some portion of some solid waste management fees. But it is, it's always a challenge. There's always a lot of stressors and strains on this particular fund. Even for, we're a rural state, but there's a lot of bad stuff out there. And, we need to spend that money on addressing it.
Yeah.
Curious when the last time was that we raised the tax on the hazardous waste materials?
It was the 1980s. I'm not 100% sure.
All right, members have further questions for Commissioner Beeling, whose name I will get right.
Thank you. You don't say Belling. You said Bailing. Bailing is pretty phonetically correct. So it's pretty.
Yeah.
So can you just do the very high level overview of the 9 million, the buckets and the 9 million?
So the 9 million, again, our sense is that a lot of the capital costs will probably be covered by the 3 million, some in the 9 million. A lot of the 9 million is going to end up being O&M. That's it. When we run the
Operations and-
I'm sorry, operation and maintenance. That's changing out the filter.
Oh, that's the filters.
Yeah. So that's where the big numbers come from. The capital costs for installing a poet aren't that high. It's really maintaining these systems. It's almost as much as the cost of installing it every year. So that's where it gets really expensive.
And can you remind us what that stands for? POET system?
Point of entry treatment.
Yeah.
Alan Ginsberg.
Yeah. Representative Stemmer.
Sorry, so the 3 million is for installation or is it for testing and installation?
It's principally so it's really the first response. So it's composed of the actual installation of poets and some investigation once we find the hits. Okay. So it's really kind of our first foray. We're going to do the testing, install poets where we find it, and then do additional investigation in the vicinity of where we find it. We think that's in the 3 million range, and then we'll see. But we think conservatively 9 million hopefully gets us a ways down the road for.
All right, further questions, committee? Representative Sibilia and then Morris.
Sorry. So you sent out 900 randomly generated letters. 700, sorry. 700. So if a Vermonter does not receive a letter and wants to be, can they ask to be tested? What's the deal there?
So what we would typically do in that situation, we've been doing this for a long time now, is we would connect them with the Department of Health and have them give them a list of certified laboratories and have them do it themselves. And some people have been doing that. I have several colleagues who've done that just to find out. So we would usually give them the resources, tell them where they can look for that. But we wouldn't typically go out. Otherwise, it can get kind of out of control.
So you'd ask that they would have to go do it out of pocket. So if they're next to, say, a building that's been identified on some list.
We would have. So if we have a source, we've looked at them.
Okay.
Okay. That's already happened.
All right, Representative Smith. Oh, sorry, Morris. Representative Morris.
Why do you call Smith? Next time. Right, Brian. Go right ahead, Rick.
I can't. I'm going to resign to my elders.
What are you talking about?
Is that a rule we
How many parts per million is allowable?
It's actually we measure in the parts per trillion for PFAS, and it's combined. There's 5 compounds that are regulated in Vermont, and if the 5 compounds add up to 20 parts per trillion in any individual sample, that's exceeding what's called the maximum contaminant level and requires treatment.
Is that comparable to the federal level?
federal, the EPA has not set an MCL yet. They are in the process of setting an MCL. We expect to hear on sometime this spring. They have health advisories, which they've issued, but we've gone ahead and issued our own MCL for PFAS in 2017, 18 timeframe.
Representative Morris, did you remember your question?
Yeah, let the young guy go.
Right now, within the hour, I did. Thank you so much for the presentation. And when we talk about PFAS, there's some advocates out there that are saying any trace of PFAS is unacceptable.
Right.
And so we have the benchmarks that we're looking at now. My concern, coming from a community that has significant brownfield sites, and there are others around the state, it's we're not alone in this process. And I asked Matt Chapman last time he was in. This is kind of a new initiative for the PFAS, and as a result of the Bennington incident and finding it in our schools, the testing, and now we're doing the well testing for privates. Wells. I'm concerned that we don't want to drift too far away from brownfields, coming from a community that is blessed with many sites, and plus a Superfund site. So when you talk about that pot of money, whatever the cost is going to be, I still would advocate for some of the older brownfield sites that, and I'm wondering your thoughts around that.
So there is a pretty robust brownfields funding package that we put together. And I agree with you. I think brownfields are incredibly beneficial, because you take these set properties that no one's ever going to touch and you put them back into commerce, jobs, tax, everything. So brownfields are great. Standards are standards, right? We respond to what basically the health department, that they say this is an unsafe standard. That's our mission. We have to clean up to that standard. So it doesn't prevent brownfields from being developed. It's just that's going to have to be the benchmark. So if the numbers change, then they change. If they don't, they don't. But right now, if you have a brownfield, the part of the goal of the brownfield redevelopment would be to get the PFAS below 20 parts per trillion. And that's going to be the case going forward. So we have to deal with whatever contaminants are present on a brownfield site. We need to deal with them.
Correct. And my points around the emphasis a few years ago was PCBs, including the Burlington High School.
Yeah.
And there are other sites around that are blessed with those chemicals. So I'm concerned that the emphasis is going to be shifted from cleanups.
I think my sense is we're working very hard to fund brownfields as best as we can. Between us and ACCD, we've really been pretty aggressive in seeking funding. We've got a lot of federal funding, so I think we're going to keep moving that forward.
Okay, I didn't hear it mentioned, so that's why I was asking.
I could come in on brownfields and talk about that.
I'm sure we'll have you back.
Okay.
Thank you. We need to one more question.
I just want to be clear because I'm the point person on this.
Yep.
So there's only 3 million in this document I'm looking at. So what you're talking about is the 3 million for installing the poets and maybe a little bit of investigation, and the 9 million for O&M would be future in the budget.
That's
Okay.
a separate ask. Yes.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for coming in, and that's really helpful. And I personally think that this is a great investment. I guess actually I might have one more question, which is, did you say in the letters that went out that these monies would be
We
available?
left it open-ended. We did not say that we were going to fund both systems. We didn't want to count any chickens.
Okay, all right.
Or the eggs.
All right.
Thank you.
No,
Thanks
it's too expensive. Thank you.
Right.
All right, committee. We're going to shift gears.
So that I'm a bit more clear. How is his name spelled?
BELANG. Why I struggle. Beeling.
Okay.
Representative Dolan, please join
Sure.
us. Okay, members, so I have a question for you, Kate. To get those, the other little windows up higher in my screen, because I can't see Representative Logan. This is the first time they've been right behind the witness. Usually they're either over on the left or up in the right or somewhere else. Can't do it. I tried. Well, I changed it because I don't like watching us big. And then if we,
There it is.
maybe, but where's Kate? Kate's gone.
It's gone.
If I want Kate,
Oh, can you slide? Can you scroll?
that's what I got. All right. Look later. All right, we're shifting gears. We have with us Representative Dolan, who is the main lead sponsor on H67 household hazardous waste bill, and she's gonna tell us why she introduced it. Welcome, Representative Dolan.
Welcome. It's great to be back here in this room and seeing you all. I don't believe we've met Carrie Dolan. Maybe just brief. I think I know everyone else. And the ironic thing is that I may be the chief sponsor for this bill to this committee this year. But in a prior session, Representative Stebbins was the prime sponsor. So we've switched roles here. H67 is about household hazardous waste. And I do encourage you to take a look at the findings. There's quite a bit of good background information about the value of this bill, the importance of this bill. But the term household hazardous waste are those leftover household products that contain flammable, corrosive, reactive, and toxic ingredients. And these products are the most toxic or dangerous materials in our solid waste stream. And two big efforts, what we try to do on the state is to certainly reduce inputs to our only landfill, as well as to reduce the toxicity. And that's what this bill does. While federal law regulates these projects, if they're actually generated by businesses, they're left alone if they're generated at home. So the disposal of household hazardous waste can happen intentionally or unintentionally. And these materials can be dangerous when put in the trash or on the ground, down the drain, into sewers, or stored unintentionally that can cause exposure to children and pets. And this, the state reports that about 640 tons of household hazardous waste are inappropriately disposed of in the landfill. And they can also pose a risk to sanitation workers as they handle these materials. So the purpose of this bill, excuse me, are to accomplish four outcomes: the diversion of these products from our landfill, the reduction of the toxicity of our waste stream, a reduction of health and safety risks to sanitation workers and the public, and a reduction in municipal costs, because that's what's paying for it now. So why are we taking this up? Well, this bill has passed the House twice now, but it did stall in the Senate. So I'm hoping that three's a charm, and for three important reasons. First, cost. Municipal costs of collecting and managing household hazardous waste are rising and making the current collection system unsustainable from a cost perspective. As described last year, municipalities are burdened with paying for the collection and proper disposal of these materials, which run close to $2 million a year and growing. And these substances are dangerous, as I mentioned. They're flammable, corrosive, reactive, or toxic, posing public health and safety risks. And third, this bill is the product of the hard work on the part of the administration this year, of the administration, agency officials, the Vermont Product Stewardship Council, which are the municipal solid waste districts and alliances across the state, and is being introduced on the Senate side as well by the chair of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. So to walk through the bill, the first section is findings. Section 2 adds a B to chapter 164.
We're going to walk through it with legislative counsel.
Oh, great. That stays in. No wonder you want to have me keep to 5 minutes. So
You were talking so fast.
We just wanted to know why you thought it was important, and we'll ask if members have questions for you.
Fabulous. And so I just want to finish, if I may, with pointing out this is a win-win, win-win. It's good for our one-lined landfill and by diverting toxics from being inappropriately disposed of there. It's good for municipalities because it's relieving them of some of the financial burden of managing and disposing of household hazardous waste. It's good for taxpayers by creating a financially stable management system. It's good for Vermonters by offering them convenient, reliable, available, and safe ways of disposing household hazardous waste. It's good for our waste haulers because it reduces the risks in the handling and transporting of these hazardous chemicals, and it's good for the environment. It's a bit different from last year's bill, but of course we learn over time, and I think there's been some important improvements. But you'll hear from that from the general counsel.
Great, thank you.
Just one quick question.
Sure.
I didn't catch, how many tons did you say?
640 tons per year.
Okay.
Members have any further questions for Representative Dolan? Seeing any? Thank you. Oh, Representative Sedalia.
Madam Chair, Representative Dolan, any particular reasons that this did not get moved that we're aware of?
From prior years?
Yeah.
I think it was just a backlog of priority projects on the Senate side.
Representative Torrey.
And since then, has the problem worsened? Like,
It's an
more-
ongoing problem. It poses those same risks as I had outlined and what we're trying to solve.
and the
And the
costs
costs
are,
are going up, yeah. Great. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Good seeing you.
Good to see you all. Bye. Gosh, I was 5 minutes more or less.
fast.
Okay. Next, we have our Legislative Counsel, Michael O'Grady, to walk us through the bill. So members, you can now hopefully find H67 on our webpage. Was sent to Health and Human Services and was referred back to our committee this morning.
Do you want me to drive it on the screen or not?
Do members have preferences? I don't necessarily need that. I can follow along on my own screen.
I think it's great for people viewing at home because everyone's watching us.
Yeah. Okay, great. I'm hearing folks would like you to join this. room if you don't mind.
Does it show on a computer somewhere how many people actually view?
It does if you go to our YouTube channel.
It does.
It'll tell you who watched it live and who's watched it since.
Do you have an idea of how many people watch it daily? Or?
I haven't looked this year. Sometimes depends on what we're talking about.
Yeah, right.
So I just have to do some navigating. Is the bill not?
Is he invited in the room? Not in mine.
Is it the same as introduced?
Yep. Okay. All right. Kate, did I get the Zoom for this?
I think so. I did just send it again, just so it should be at the front of your.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, this is probably just the whole email delay.
There it is, finally.
Could you, there it is. Got it. All right, I'm gonna. No, this is. Can you let me share screen? Yep. All right. Here we go. Would you like me to begin?
Yes.
This is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Counsel. I'm going to do a bill walkthrough of H67, inoculating the household products containing hazardous substances. For those members new to the committee, when I do a bill walkthrough, I like to give a general overview of what the bill does, and then start to walk through the specific components of the bill. I try not to read the bill, but sometimes I feel I have to on certain important parts of the bill. And in this bill, some of the most important parts are in the definitions section. So generally, what does this bill do? It establishes a requirement for extended producer responsibility of household hazardous products. Extended producer responsibility is a policy or a legislation that requires the producer or manufacturers of a product to take responsibility for the end-of-life management of their product, including the disposition of the product. And it usually involves the manufacturer both financially and operationally taking responsibility. They pay for the management of the disposition of the product, and they actually implement a program to manage the disposition of the product. That's not always the case, but that's usually what is done. Vermont has several programs, EPR programs, for paint, mercury-containing light bulbs, electronic waste, primary batteries. The bottle bill is an EPR program, mercury-containing thermostats. All except the bottle bill generally follow the same process, where legislation was enacted telling manufacturers that by a certain date they needed to implement an EPR program or they could no longer sell their product in the state. Now, EPR programs, some people think they're overly technical, they're confusing, they're too detailed, and the legislation can look detailed, but frankly, it is basically how EPR is done in this state and in other states. The only way I really know how to simplify it is to give an agency the delegation to run the program themselves, which some states have done. You basically just say, hey, agency, you can adopt rules to do EPR for this program. But then you're basically giving up the decision-making authority, the policy-making authority about what is covered and what is not. So that's what it is, EPR for household hazardous products, also known as household hazardous waste. Those products that would, if they were generated in sufficient capacity, be considered hazardous waste, cannot be disposed of in a landfill. Generally what this program does. So I'll start stepping through the bill. The sponsor referenced the findings and the basis for them. There are thousands of products in the state that contain hazardous substances that are sold to consumers. Vermont's hazardous waste rules establish specific requirements for the management of that hazardous waste, including a prohibition on disposal in landfills. Those leftover products are known as household hazardous waste. They're regulated through A&R solid waste rules, and they're regulated and requires solid waste management entities, referred to as the SWMEs, to have a plan, and in that plan to manage those hazardous household hazardous waste under that plan. That requires them to divert those products from landfills, and they are required to have either a permanent collection facility or at least 2 collection events in their district every year. Many of the swimmies offer more than 2 collection events. Collection events or permanent facilities are expensive to operate, and the state solid waste management entities spend approximately $1.6 million and going up a year to manage household hazardous waste. Those costs are subsequently passed on to the residents of Vermont through taxes, fees, or disposal charges. As a result of the failure to divert household hazardous waste, 640 tons or more is disposed of in landfills. There's a general agreement among the swimmies agency that additional collection sites and education are necessary to capture more of the household hazardous waste. And funding constraints are really what are preventing that education and additional education and collection. And then household hazardous waste released into the environment can contaminate the environment and pose a significant health threat. Therefore, to improve diversion, reduce the financial burden on swimmies and taxpayers, reduce the costs of the overall system, and lessen environmental and public health risk, the state should implement a program to require manufacturers of household products containing a hazardous substance to implement a stewardship program organization to collect household products containing a hazardous substance free of charge to the public. Most of Vermont's EPR programs are free of charge. One is not. That is the paint program, where you pay an assessment on every container of paint that you buy to help, not totally pay, to help pay for the program. I'll stop there. Anyone have any questions on the findings?
Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So when we say the manufacturer's responsibility, that's not, say, the paint. That's not the person that distributes the paint store, that they would have to contribute to this, right? Correct?
It depends. And we'll get to that when you get to the definition of manufacturer. The definition of manufacturer is intended to incorporate all the different scenarios in which a product is coming into the state.
Right.
Sometimes there's a manufacturer without a state presence. Someone's bringing that in and then selling it or distributing it. Those people can be part of this program.
Okay.
So I will start walking through the definitions. As I noted, there's some important definitions here. The first is consumer product. It's any product that's regularly used or purchased for personal, family, or household purposes. So that's kind of like the baseline. That's a consumer product, is where you start from. Then you go to the definition of covered household hazardous product. It's a consumer product offered for retail sale, contained in a receptacle. So mass bulk sale of substances are not household products. They're not part of this. So it has to be in a receptacle, and it has to be in the receptacle that's offered for sale. And if it has any one of the following characteristics. Now, you heard Representative Dolan say corrosive, ignitive, flammable, etc. Last year and in previous versions of this bill, you used to list out that characteristic specifically. But the agency said, oh, you don't really need to do that anymore. You just need to reference that it's subject to the transit requirements of Vermont's hazardous waste management rules. And that's what section 7-702 is. So if it's subject, if it's a consumer product offered for retail sale in a receptacle, and it's already subject to hazardous waste management transit requirements, it's going to be subject to this bill. It also is if the product is a gas cylinder. Yes.
So we have a question from Representative Sibilia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Definition 2, consumer product. I want to make sure that I'm reading that right. That's any product that is regularly used or purchased to be used for personal, family, or household purposes.
Yep.
So the regularly used is not attached to a purchase.
No, I mean, it's if it's going to be used, it's basically marketed and used. We used because sometimes these products aren't actually sold, they're just distributed. And you want them to be covered under this program if they're used.
You mean like given away, distributed
Um,
for free?
You can get some of these products for free.
I'm curious, are you going to go back to definition 3? Because I think you skipped covered entity.
I did skip over covered entity because consumer product and covered household
That's what I thought.
product are linked. A covered entity is any person that takes one of these products to a collection point. So it's an individual, it can be businesses, and they can bring any number of these products to the collection point, with the exception of a large quantity generator or a small quantity generator. So a large quantity generator is someone that's generating, there's a couple of different criteria that you could qualify for, but the first is you're generating 2,200 pounds of hazardous waste a month. So it's pretty much no household is going, I hope no household.
Number again, 2,000.
2,200 pounds a month of hazardous waste. A small generator is one that's generating 220 to 2,200 pounds. So both of those cannot bring their waste to a collection point free of charge. They have to manage that waste underneath the hazardous waste rules.
Representative Zachary.
Is there a word rationale for those particular limits? It sounds like it was converted from metric system, but besides that, I'm just sort of wondering why those numbers were chosen. They're very nice round numbers in the metric system.
I honestly think that they're drawn from federal law, but there is a possibility that some of the international conventions have influenced those federal numbers, because there's something called the Basel Convention on the Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Waste. And so the United States has signed on to that. And when you exceed certain thresholds of waste and you try to export it, it triggers Basel. And so it's probably both federal influenced by international standards. So going back down to the definition of a covered household hazardous product, it includes gas cylinders. You had a discussion last year about whether gas cylinders are going to be in or not. This bill got input from the solid waste management entities. They really want gas cylinders in, because the gas cylinders wind up in the solid waste stream. They wind up at the transfer stations, they wind up in the landfill, and they pose a public safety threat. You may not recall, but one blew up at the Williston transfer station a couple of years ago. And they see these as a threat to their staff and a threat of fire or other kind of emergency risk at a transfer station, or they want them in. Another change is that all pesticides, class A, B, and C, which are pretty much all of the pesticides that the Agency of Agriculture regulates, would also be part, except you'll see later on that there's going to be a threshold, because the Agency of Agriculture already runs something of a collection program for unused pesticides on farms. So they're going to continue that over a certain threshold. The household products, your Raid, your wasp spray, all of that, those are pesticides. They are in the program now.
That makes sense. Yeah. Representative Sibilia.
On the gas cylinders, is that like the little camping green thing?
Go to the next definition. and I'm gonna have to come back to some of the exceptions.
Questions till we get through the
I
bill?
think we should probably, or we're not gonna get through it.
Okay. I'm gonna hold my question.
Okay, well, you'll see gas cylinder, it's up to 50 pounds of a water capacity. So it's not just your little ones, it's gonna be your, probably the size ones.
But it does include the little.
It does. Okay. Now, I want to note what is not a covered product. It's not batteries. It's not mercury containing lamps. It's not mercury containing thermostats. It's not paint. It's not electronic devices. It's not pharmaceutical drugs. Because you already have EPR programs for all of those things.
And citronella candles?
You don't have citronella candles, but citronella candles and flea and tick collars are in because you're now bringing in pesticides. And those are pesticides, but you're not going to put citronella candles in the category of household hazardous products. You're not going to put flea and tick collars in the category of household hazardous products. And then you're not going to put those class A, B, or C sold in containers greater than 2.5 gallons. That's the Agency of Agriculture's program. They're going to do that.
Can you say that again?
So the Agency of Agriculture already runs a take-back program. Take-back is another way to do EPR. And so they're going to continue their take-back program for any pesticide sold in a container greater than 2.5 gallons. Because that's really no longer a household product. That's going to be a farm or commercial product. This is going to just be the household products. Should I move on?
Yes.
So then you come to the definition of manufacturer. And this is designed to bring in every kind of variant of how the product gets into the state. First, it's the people that manufacture in the state under its own brand or label for sale in the state. So they're in. Then it's the people that sell in the state under its own brand or label of a covered household product produced by another supplier. It's also a person that owns a brand that licensed to another person for use on a covered household product sold in the state. It's also someone that imports into the state for sale in the state that covered household hazardous product when it's manufactured by a person without a presence in the US. It's also a manufacturer that with who produces the product without affixing a brand. So that is generally the definition of manufacturer used in all of the EPR programs. Every variant that you can think of how the product gets into the state is covered. And then the last is a person that assumes the responsibilities and obligations of any of the manufacturers listed 1 through 5. That's what we're going to call the stewardship organization. The stewardship organization are the people that assume the responsibilities, liabilities, and obligations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to stay on this subject, what does it mean for those hardware stores that sell paint? They also sell the gas cylinders. They buy them out of state. They buy them from, like, say, Ace Hardware has they buy it from someplace else. What is their obligation to the waste stream? Is it a fee? Will a fee be incurred on them, or what happens to those entities?
So there's numerous factual scenarios you can go through, like Home Depot. They sell gas canisters, but they sell the Blue Rhino gas canister, right? So that's branded. And so the manufacturer that will be responsible is Blue Rhino.
Okay.
Because they're the branded one that's distributing in the state. They're not manufacturing it in the state, but they are distributing in the state, selling it under their own brand or label. So they are the one. Now, Home Depot also makes its own kind of line of products, And so say one of those, a grout cleaner that's considered hazardous. Home Depot will now be the manufacturer because they both are manufactured it, or they're selling it under their brand or label, or they're selling it under a licensed brand or label that was produced by somebody else.
So they're gonna be,
They're gonna
no middleman to cut out there. They're responsible.
They're gonna be responsible.
So-
Now, what they have to do, if you just give me a little bit of time.
Yeah.
I'll come to that.
Okay, all right.
in a second.
Yep, thanks.
Okay.
Generally, maybe we could just walk through the bill and then we'll see where we're at after, because
Okay.
we're a little fast for time.
So who is not a manufacturer, there's going to be a de minimis exception in this version of the bill. Someone that's selling $5,000 a product or less, they're going to be accepted out. A&Rs probably want them to register with them so they know who they are, know the products that are excluded, but small manufacturers are out. The next definition is orphan. Those are when you can't identify who the manufacturer is, but it's brought into a collection point. It still has to be collected. It still has to be managed, but there's called the orphan share. There's a share that all the manufacturers will have to pay for when they can't identify who the manufacturer is. Then you get to the definition of stewardship organization. It's the legal entity that basically assumes the responsibilities, obligations, and liabilities of the manufacturers that are its members. All right, I'm going to stop there. Any questions on definitions?
Okay.
I did not, no, I didn't raise my hand,
Okay.
Madam Chair. I'm just taking it all in.
Just looking at the time.
All right, so then you get to
I don't want you to hurry.
the operative portion. It's the sale ban. These are how these programs work. Because the state can, under its 10th Amendment authority, ban the sale of certain products in the state to protect public health, the environment, et cetera. And so that is what these programs do. The product is banned unless the manufacturer is participating in a stewardship organization that's implementing an approved collection plan. They've got to be part of the stewardship organization, and there has to be an approved plan. That all of the manufacturers' brands that are part of the program are listed on the stewardship organization's website. So A&R can figure out if the brand is covered, and the consumer can figure out if the brand is covered. And then the stewardship submits an annual report, which is going to be important for the performance of the program. And the stewardship organization has conducted a plan audit that doesn't start the first one until 5 years, till after the program's been in place. That's it. Manufacturer has to be part of the stewardship organization. They have to have their brands and products listed on the stewardship organization's website, and the stewardship organization has to comply with the annual reporting requirement. That's how a manufacturer gets to sell. Stewardship organizations have to register with the state, and they have to meet some basic requirements in order to be approved for registration. Again, they have to list all their manufacturers participating. They have to list all the brands that are participating. They have to list all the products that are participating. They have to have a contact information for A&R to contact them. They have a description of how they meet some of the basic requirements. One of the basic requirements is you can't prohibit another manufacturer from being part of your stewardship organization, because there's a kind of a economics of scale issue for the Agency of Natural Resources. They want fewer of these organizations because that's fewer plans that they have to review, fewer programs they have to oversee to make sure that they're complying. So one of the requirements for a stewardship organization, you cannot have unreasonable barriers to participation. Then there has to be a name and address and contact information for a manufacturer who wants to participate in the stewardship organization to contact. And then you come to the part of any EPR bill that the Vermont has done that seems to kind of bog people down. It's the collection plan. And what is going to be required for any stewardship organization in order to implement their program? What do they have to do? So there needs to be a collection plan. It has to be submitted to A&R prior to July 1, 2024. So A&R can review the plan and determine if it's sufficient. The plan has to meet minimum requirements. Again, it has to list the participants and brands and products. You'll see that like in every EPR program. Tell us what you're covering. Then it has to be free. It has to be free for the covered entity. The person bringing the product to the collection point has to be able to bring that there without a cost barrier. Because if there's a cost barrier, the concept is people won't bring it. So if it's free, they can bring it at their discretion, at their will. The stewardship organization has to collect every product that's covered. You can't say, hey, that's not my brand, I'm not collecting it. They have to collect it, even if it's an orphan. And they can't refuse any product that is part of the program. Free, no refusal, any amount, orphan, etc. They have to accept it. They also have to pay for the payment of collection, processing, and end-of-life management of the household hazardous product, including facility cost. You'll see later on that that is referenced to the facility cost of the solid waste management entities. So the cost that your towns are already paying for the management of this is going to be assumed by these organizations. So moving on, it has to have convenient collection locations, the convenience requirement. This is often a one that like manufacturers get a little bit, you tell them they have to have 2 collection points. They have to have 5 collection points. They have to have 10 collection points if there's 10,000 people in the municipality. This is where they start to get anxious and itch. So this one says they shall develop a collection program that allows all municipal household hazardous waste collection programs to opt to be part of the collection plan. So what this is saying is your swimmies, which are already out there and are already providing these services, that the stewardship organization can use all of them if the swimmies opt into it. So the concept is the convenience that's already there will continue at that baseline, but the stewardship organization is going to pay for those costs of those swimmy collection events or the swimmy collection facility. You're not mandating certain amount of events, certain amount of collection points per county, certain amount of collection points within 10,000 people. What's there is there, and if they have to do more to meet their goal, then they'll have to do more.
Seems like they're going to have to do more than what they're doing now if they're 640 tons not making it.
Well, the next part of the plan is it has to have a public education and outreach component to notify and make the public aware of the fact that you can't dispose of these things in the landfill, that you can bring them to facilities for collection events for free, and that you can bring as much as you want. And then they're supposed to survey the public about what they know, and hopefully that will inform the agency and the stewardship organization and how to go forward. It may lead to additional convenience requirements, additional collection sites. Education has to address that there's free collection. They have to address the location and hours of operation. They have to address that there's special handling for these. These products can hurt you. And if you don't manage them appropriately, you can be hurt. And so there's going to be special handling requirements, and the public needs to be made aware of them. And there has to be source reduction information. The plan has to provide for compliance with appropriate environmental standards. It has to comply with methods of disposition. And that method of disposition has to be managed in the most effective, environmentally and economically sound manner. And it has to be done according to the waste management hierarchy of the state, which is reduce, reuse, prevent, essentially that type of hierarchy. Moving on, the plan has to list all the players, the participants in the program, who's your transporter, who's collecting for you, where are you going to dispose of this? There has to be a chain of custody that the agency can follow to determine that these products are being collected and dealt with appropriately. Then there's a performance goal. This is also one of the things that EPR programs struggle with, especially when getting off the ground, is how do you determine success? And here, what the proposal is to divide the number of total participants by the number of households in the state. So you'll get a percentage, effectively, of how many participants in the state versus number of households. And in the beginning year, you're looking for a 5% participation rate. And you'll see that on line 21 of page 13. That's what you're looking for in the first year. But when after the initial approval, there's going to be reporting. There's going to be subsequent changes to the participation rate. So after the initial approved program plan, the stewardship organization proposes a participation rate for subsequent program years. And that participation rate shall be equal to or greater than the average participation rates achieved in the previous program year. So they report what their participation was. If it's over 5%, say it's 7%. Now 7% is their floor. That's their participation rate in the next year, their goal. So the more they do, better, the higher their goal becomes. Now, if they don't meet their
It's like,
if they don't meet their participation rate, the agency can require more education. They can require more collection. They can require additional hours of operation at collection sites. So better outreach, better collection. And they are not, the stewardship organization is not authorized to reduce or cease collection or education or other activities on the basis of achievement of a program goal. So say they hit their 5% in month 7, they don't just shut the program down, right? They have to continue the program throughout the year. So they don't have an incentive to keep their next year's goal at 5%. Remember, so their goal is going to increase based on what their participation rate is. So the first year it's 5%, but say they get to 8. Say they're at 8% in October, they're like, damn, we're gonna have to do 8 for the next year. We better shut this program down so we don't get to 10. You can't do that.
Yeah, what happens if you do that?
Well, there's enforcement authority. A&R can penalize them for failure to comply with the requirements of the plan, failure to comply with the requirements of the program.
Do other EPRs have this?
No, this is the first one that has this kind of build the rate and make that rate your subsequent year's goal.
Do other states have this?
Not for household hazardous products. There is no other state that has an EPR program for household hazardous products. Oregon is the only one, other one that I know of that even has a bill out there. But there are other programs that have these automatically increasing participation rates or program goals.
In other states?
In other states for different products.
Seems like a little bit of a built-in disincentive.
Built-in disincentive.
To get a flourishing program.
I just, it really will be in those first few years about A&R making sure that the program is effectively educated and outreached, people know about it. I expect the swimmies will probably take on some notice and education because it's in their best interest. I think you'll see a lot of outreach in those first couple of years. And with that outreach, you'll get a better performance participation rate. To an extent, I don't think there's much that a stewardship organization can do if there's enough education and outreach about the collection.
Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So theoretically, could this, I'm going to stick on the hardware store, guys. Could this bill theoretically force like hardware stores a hardship by making them collect the waste receptacles and they would, in order to do that, they would actually have to drive up their costs for products, correct?
So
Theoretically.
So it's a great question because many of the other EPR programs allow retailers to opt in as a collection point to provide their customers a place to go because it brings them into the store, right? If you bring your mercury bulbs back, you're in Home Depot, and maybe you're going to go buy something now.
True.
This stuff is different. This stuff, if it's not managed properly, not stored properly, it's an environmental and public safety risk. But this stuff, the retailer is not even allowed to opt in. This stuff is going to be managed through the existing collection points and other approved collection points in the future. It's not for a retailer to be a collection point.
Okay. But they would have to pay some kind of a fee towards this, right? Am I getting this wrong?
If they're a manufacturer, and we're going to get to that in right now. So part of the plan has to outline how the stewardship organization is going to fund itself and how it's going to fund the program. And so basically how this works is that the manufacturers join and become members of another corporation. For paint, it's called Paint Care. Paint Care represents like 98% of the paint manufacturers in the United States. Paint Care then looks at the cost of each state program and then allocates those costs to its membership, manufacturer's membership, usually based on a product share model for the state. So this one, you're probably going to have breakdowns on product categories, so like your insecticides, your cleaning products, et cetera, in order to break down the appropriate market share and then allocate the cost of that. But that's what they have to describe in their plan, how they're going to do it, so that the A&R and the public know how the cost is going to be borne. And you're right. Most of these programs are going to be paid for through shifting of a cost to a product. But it's not $5 for every can of Raid you bring in, which you might have to pay at a hazardous household waste collection event. It's now going to be 10 cents on every one of those products sold in the state. And that is how the cost is then shifted. Again, to reinforce this point, collection costs include facility costs, equipment costs. The collection plan shall include how municipalities will be compensated for all costs associated with collection of covered household hazardous products. So that municipal collection point is going to be a collection point under this program. They get reimbursed for all of their costs. A plan is a 5-year plan. They have to begin implementation of the plan on January 1, 2025. We already talked about what a stewardship organization is, what they have to do to qualify and be registered. They have to assume responsibilities of all their manufacturers. They can't create unreasonable burdens for participation, and they have to maintain a public website listing all their products. There's an annual report beginning March 1, 2026. Has to describe the program and has to report the volume or weight of what they've collected, how they dispose of the collected products, and the number of covered entities participating in each collection facility. So that's how you get both your participation rate by households and your performance rate in what is collected. They have to report the weight, and they have to provide sales data. So this helps the state understand how it's going to be apportioned. Sales data is going to be confidential, as it is with many of the EPR programs. It's something that the manufacturers hold close. And so the state does not require them to disclose that publicly.
Michael, just, can you stay with us right now for a little bit past the hour?
Yep.
Great. So just public service announcement. Our next witness can wait till 3:15. So we have time to get through the bill, I hope.
There needs to be an audit done every 5 years by an independent third party that looks at the effectiveness of the cost of the program and the effectiveness of its performance. When you get a bunch of manufacturers that are meeting together as part of one organization and they're talking about how they're going to sell their products, that looks like a violation of antitrust law. That looks like them colluding. And you cannot, manufacturers cannot collude on price and or region of sale. This says that for the purposes of them implementing the stewardship organization, it's not a state antitrust law violation. But on page 19, if they do anything outside of collusion outside of the stewardship organization, then especially on price and geographic area of sale, then they are subject to antitrust. There is agency responsibilities. They have to review and approve all the collection plans and make sure that all of the components of the collection plans are there. They have to review the participation rates, make sure that they're adequate. They have to make every plan available for a 30-day public notice period. Another part of this that I've skipped over is that they have to approve the plan within 90 days of receiving it. So they get a proposed plan, they have 90 days, not including the 30-day public notice period. They have 90 days to approve, because the timeline for this program, it's not unreasonable, but considering the scope of the program, you want to give the manufacturers kind of an effective and predictable timeline so that they can implement this program. So part of that is putting A&R on notice that they have 90 days to approve the plan. Public input. One of the things on pesticides is that A&R is going to work with the Agency of Ag for the purposes of identifying those pesticides that are going to be household products and those that are going to be in the 2.5 gallons or above that are going to be regulated by the Agency of Ag. Then you get to the advisory committee. This committee is 7 members that will basically be advising the Agency of Natural Resources on the program. One individual who's a manufacturer, one who's a representative of the hazardous waste company, one who is from a SWMI with a permanent collection facility, one from a SWMI that does events, one from a statewide retail association, one from a statewide environmental organization, and one from a community-based organization or organization representing equity and underrepresented stakeholders. They are going to review all the plans. Hopefully there's only 1 or 2 of them, but they're going to review the plans. They're going to recommend to the secretary whether to approve a plan. They'll review and comment on all reports. They'll recommend planned amendments, and they'll review and comment on draft rules that A&R has the authority to adopt. They have to meet at least quarterly for the initial plan, and semi-annually after that. They get to have their own bylaws. A&R is going to staff them, but they can get a third-party facilitator if they're not getting along. The other thing is that municipalities or other public agency, such as a SWMI, can't direct that these household hazardous products be disposed of in a certain way. There's this branch of solid waste law that says if you own your landfill, if you own your transfer station, you can direct that all the waste from your municipality has to be sent to your landfill or sent to your transfer station. And so this is saying, no, you can't do that, because that'll undermine the program. Because if one municipality is saying, no, we're keeping all of this kind of product because we can then sell this product to somebody and make money, and the stewardship organization can't get any of this product from our municipality, that undermines the program. So you can't do that. A&R is going to recommend a fee that stewardship organizations would pay to register in the state to run a collection plan. Section 4 is the landfill disposal ban. You can't dispose of the covered household hazardous products in a landfill. Section 5 is A&R's enforcement authority. For those of you new to the committee, instead of putting individual enforcement authority for A&R in each program that A&R does, since there's about 30 of them, you put one, you have an individual chapter that A&R uses for all its enforcement. So this is just referencing that it is the 32nd program that A&R will be using as its general enforcement authority on. And similarly, for any appeal of an A&R decision, there's one chapter that governs that. This is being added to that. For some reason, it's only W, where the others is 32. I don't know why, but I digress. But that's the end of the bill.
I have a few questions too. Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what is the process for how like the manufacturers or distributors of these products be told about this proposed bill, and how long do they have to comply if it's passed?
So their notice is through their representatives in this building, whether or not it's a lobbying firm or a larger association. That's how they're noticed. And then they have notice beyond that, like any other member of the public. They know about it.
Okay.
And then the timeline, I can go through the timeline. But they have until July of 2024 to get a plan to A&R.
You said that earlier, yeah.
And then A&R has 90 days plus a 30-day review period to approve. And then that plan has to be in place by January 1 of 2025 in order for their product to be legally sold in the state.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question first. Can you just rewind to the 10th Amendment enabling the states to allow to ban a product being sold unless they, I can't imagine it looked forward to a extended producer responsibility. So, but how does that work, the 10th Amendment piece?
So the 10th Amendment is the source of much of the state's authority to regulate in environment and public health and welfare. It says that the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, so to the US government, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So unless the Constitution says that this is a sole authority of the federal government, or it says the states can't do this, states have the right under the 10th Amendment to regulate in that field. And it extends to all objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people of the state. So it's the core authority for state regulation pretty much of anything. But particularly, it has been held to be the authority that states rely on in regulating for the public health and welfare and the environment.
Thank you for that. Would products that utilize PFAS in any way be able to be brought into this?
They probably would already. Some of them probably are already in. Many of them probably aren't household.
So what would be in? That's a really good question. It's, anything that has that's really for household use, consumer residential use, that has a PFAS in it.
Lipstick?
For viscosity. And it might be, do you know what an adjuvant is? It's something that's added to a pesticide to make it perform better, like make it stick to something. So you could probably have adjuvants in some household pesticides. Yeah, I mean, some of these products probably, you hear people say that the feds have banned PFAS. There's 5,000 versions of it. I don't know how they have banned all of it, unless they've just banned everything that has a fluorinated compound in it. which they have not done.
Representative Sibilia.
Yeah, under section 7187, looking at responsibilities, looking at,
Excuse me, what page?
sorry,
7187, page 19.
looking at the bottom part of that page, with the manufacturer stewardship organization fails to submit a plan that is acceptable to the secretary, because it doesn't meet the requirements, the secretary shall modify. So this, in A here, we just talk about kind of going back and forth. They'll supply it, the secretary will approve it, review and approve. So just wondering, at what point, like, how many times does the manufacturer get to go back with a revision? Doesn't seem to be specified here.
It's not specified. This is going to be an iterative process, I expect. They're going to work back and forth until they meet a ground where they can both agree.
It does say that the secretary can,
That's a hammer.
does give them a hammer.
And then at that point, if they don't want to sell in the state, they don't have to sell in the state. And the courts have said that that's not a violation of the Commerce Clause. Specifically, in a case related to Vermont, when the mercury-containing light bulbs had to be labeled with HG, the Mercury Lamp Association said that that was a violation of the Commerce Clause, and the court said, no, you either label or you don't sell, because that's really not that hard for you to put HG on your, and here, they don't have to do anything with their product. They just have to participate in an organization that runs a collection plant, and then they have to pay a fee. And what's even more supportive of the Commerce Clause argument here is the courts have said, when you're dealing with an industry that's highly regulated and knows it's highly regulated to the point that they have to implement special precautions and special management in order to protect people from their products, they know that they are subject to a higher degree of enforcement. That's what you have here. You have an industry that's already subject to significant requirements. Remember, you're defining a hazardous product as one that's already subject to hazardous waste rules. You've got something that's already regulated as a hazardous product. And you're saying you're going to be regulated for its end of life management as well.
So can I follow up? So is there any reason why we could not just be a little bit more specific about, so it says, they'll have 45 days to resubmit a plan to A&R. And then it's a little bit loose, if they fail to submit a plan that is acceptable, there's no time frame there. Is it that response? Is there any reason not to tighten that up and be specific that you get one try and then you get one,
You could, but I will say this, these programs largely rely on the relationship between the agency and the organization. And if they're working well, the programs work well. There was a program where the state did it differently, where the state said, we can't get the electronic waste manufacturers to all agree to be part of one or two stewardship organizations. So the state's going to do the plan. The state's the one that's going to come up with the plan, and the state's going to contract that out. The manufacturers, they don't like that, because they're like, oh, the state's the one that's saying what the cost is. And the manufacturer's saying, oh, it's really less than that. You don't have to. And then you've got the contractor in the middle that says, I need to make a profit. And then that contractor was saying, it just got difficult, and it got tense, and there were contractual issues, and when they're not working well together, it tends to break down. And there are industries, the battery people, man, those people do not like each other. Like they were like, we are not going to do the same plan. We're going to do our own plan because I don't want to do it with them. They did not like each other. And that's fine, right? You can have 2 or more plans. But the agency likes to have one for the efficiency of oversight and administration, regulation. But there's potential for there to be more than one plan. You might say, hey, the pesticide people are all going to do their own plan. And the toilet bowl cleaner people are all going to do their own plan. Right? And or maybe they're going to be components of one plan. But so there's this hasn't been done before for these products. So there's not just, this would be the first time it would be done. Building in a little bit of flexibility might be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Representative Smith and then Tori.
Thank you. This may be a question for after your presentation. On page 22, on line 1, it says special handling requirements. Secretary may adopt rules, special handling requirements, the collection, transport, disposal of all covered hazardous products. That's already a law right now.
There are some, yeah.
This seems to be a waste of time when there's already laws in place for the collection of hazardous waste. Maybe this is a question for another time. I don't know. But.
So you're right. I mean, there are already requirements, and this is discretionary. They don't have to. It says they may. So maybe they say that the existing law is enough and that they don't have to do anything. Maybe they identify an issue with how certain products are transported or collected, and they may do special handling requirements. But you're right. There's already laws that they're going to have to comply with.
Who wouldn't want to serve on the Household Hazardous Waste Stewardship Program Advisory Committee?
I guess you are signing
I'm
up.
pretty excited about it.
It's really just a question of who's paying for this.
Yeah.
I mean, and so right now, our solid waste management districts are in arrears because of it.
Thank you.
Representative Tori.
Thank you. My question's about the stewardship organization and our other EPR programs. Like, to me, it seems like a fairly heavy lift to staff that up and create it. Like, what's the vision for how that would work? Would it be based in Vermont? Would it be Vermonters working for it? Like, a lot of questions come to mind about that piece.
I mean, it's a good question. It really becomes the responsibility of the organization that manufacturers create.
And it's what type of legal entity is that organization?
And it depends. It's usually a corporation, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, I think you wanted to have some liability immunization, so you probably want it to be a corporation. But it becomes their responsibility, whether they're not required to be located in Vermont. No mandate that they hire state citizens to. Pain Care is a national organization. They have contractors in the state to help them run the program, but they don't need a lot to run the program because it's up and it's working, and they do it. I don't know how many states are in Pain Care right now, but a lot of them are.
But we would be the only state, right?
This would be the first.
You said Oregon.
Oregon has a bill. Oregon has a bill.
All right, we need to move on. We will certainly have Mr. O'Grady back with us. Continued discussions on this bill. Thank you so much for the walkthrough.
Ah, thank you.
5-minute break.